Good morning and welcome to 10 Years Hence. Julia Silverman is the co-founder and chief social officer of Uncharted Play Incorporated, where she oversees the distribution, curricular programming, and monitoring and evaluation of the company's social impact initiatives worldwide. Her work as the co-inventor of the Socket, an energy harvesting soccer ball, has received global recognition, including awards from the Harvard Foundation, Women in the World Foundation, and McKinsey Consulting. Prior to launching her company, Julia worked at the World Bank in the Africa Region Sustainable Development Area. She graduated with honors from Harvard University with a degree in social anthropology and economics. Julia is currently pursuing her MBA at the Harvard Business School, where she is a resident entrepreneur at the Harvard Innovation Lab. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Julia Silverman.
So I'm going to play a video because there are some things that I think are easier to see than to explain.
An idea for clean energy that I think it's fair to say hardly anybody else on the planet had ever thought of. It's quite extraordinary. Kick a ball, turn on the light. It's an off-grid solution that gives us a way to bring power and improve quality of life, working capacity, learning capacity.
Excellent. So now let's see how technologically savvy I can be this morning. Fantastic. Great. That's all I got. All right. So thank you so much for having me. I'm Julia Silverman, I guess. Now that it's all formal, I should use my last name. But Julia is fine with me. So I'm adding a couple new things to my PowerPoint. So A, if I missed anything, please forgive me. And B, if I sort of slip up, then again, just be patient with me. So as I showed in the video, I am the co-inventor of the Socket, which is a soccer ball generator. When you play with it, it actually stores energy so that you can use the power in it later as a source of energy for lights, mobile phone chargers, all of these things that we sort of take for granted in our own lives to some extent. So one of the new things I'm trying, I'll go back for a second, is if you have questions that I somehow don't get to, tweet at me or the company, and then that way, hopefully, if I don't get to it now, I can respond to you later. And you can also help, bump us, which is great. So this is a picture on the bottom left. Yeah, it's hard to see if this is reflected or not, of me and my co-founder. We invented this product as part of a project when we were in college, and I will talk about that in a bit more detail in a moment. So this is one of our older prototypes, but I think the highest quality photos that we have. And plus, that girl is so darn cute. Why wouldn't I show this? So this story actually begins in Tanzania. So we're going to go over there for a minute. That is where I did a lot of my undergraduate research. As Jim mentioned, I did social anthropology and economics, and I focused primarily on sub-Saharan Africa, microenterprise, and education. So this is just photographic Kodak proof. I guess Kodak isn't as big anymore, but Kodak proof of me in Africa because there are only lions there. Assume it's not a zoo. This is a picture of a town called Galai. It's a Maasai encampment, Boma, where I did a lot of my work. And of course, as you will notice, it is pretty rural. One of the things they do not have there is on-grid electricity. In fact, when we were there, one of our flashlights went missing, and the town was really apologetic. And we said, the flashlight, we don't really miss it, but for them, it can make a huge difference because, after the sun goes down, how are you going to read? How are you going to see around your house? How are you going to cook? There are a lot of issues there that we don't really think about. This is another picture of some women, and again, these kids, they slay me. Look how cute they are. Anyway, so just a little bit to situate you and give you some context of where we're talking about. At the same time as there's this endemic lack of energy infrastructure around many areas of the world, particularly in developing contexts, although even in our own backyard, sometimes there are energy access issues. There is a matching passion for soccer or football or calcio or whatever you want to call it. Same sport, most played, loved, watched sport in the world. Ironically, not as much in the US, but every other place in the world, it is definitely the most popular. So this is a picture of the World Cup in South Africa, so vouching for the popularity of soccer everywhere. What I realized by being in these communities, and then by extending my research further, is that energy access is unavailable, it's not there at all, unreliable, if it's there it doesn't work, and unsafe. Actually getting access to it can be sometimes fatal. As you can see here, I'll just go back for a second. This is a picture of people tapping into an electric line. So if they don't have legal access to the power grid, they actually climb up, risk electrocuting themselves, and tap into it illegally by exposing some of the wire and linking it directly to their house. Which is, of course, not something you want to be doing for a variety of reasons, but I think safety chief among them. As it said in the video earlier, 1 out of every 5 people around the world live without electricity. I think this photo is really powerful, actually, no pun intended. But you can see where there's the industrialized kind of world, and then these areas of literally black darkness. Even someplace where you would think that there might not be electricity, like India, for example, is pretty lit up there. But it does show you comparatively kind of the areas that we're talking about and that we're interested in reaching with our own products. And again, I'll talk a bit more about our own efforts further on, but to me, I think the context is so important. So I'm lingering on it. Further, as I mentioned, the safety issue, which is very important. Kerosene lamps, burning biofuels, is one of the primary alternatives to electric energy. And this is problematic for many reasons. Chief among them, I think, is respiratory health. If you're breathing in, imagine sitting right next to a campfire with all the smoke and breathing it in. That's sort of what a kerosene lamp is like. And you guys can read. It's really bad for your lungs. It's like smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day. And the light itself is not very bright, as the picture sort of reflects. So in thinking about energy and addressing the issue, what we want is energy access that is available, reliable, and safe. So now we're going back from Tanzania to Harvard, trade school on the East Coast, which is somewhere where I've spent more time than I care to admit, and has perhaps sheltered me too much, but that's a subject for another day. You can tweet at me about that. That's a spoiler alert. Anyway, so as part of my undergraduate experience there, as I mentioned, I had taken a class, and that's where the idea for this soccer ball generator came from. So why was I taking a class that was producing widgets? Long story short is funding. So for the liberal artists among us, or former liberal artistes, funding is a huge issue. And so I was wanting to kind of go back to my kind of target communities I had been working with in East and Southern Africa. And to do that, you obviously need some pocket change. So there was a class that was offering substantial stipends for good ideas, and I said, I'm going to go to that class. Which department is it in? Engineering. That's problematic because I can hardly add or subtract. So I went there anyway, and it was more of a class for translating ideas from kind of art to something more scientific, from something more scientific to appreciate the artistic aspects in it. So the group I ended up with for the kind of project for the semester was given the seed idea of a massively multiplayer online game that addresses world health, global health rather. And the group of us were 4 of us, all girls, none engineers. And when we heard massively multiplayer online game, we were like, no, that's not going to happen. So we thought pretty critically about how we were going to address, a global health issue or a kind of development issue more broadly. And we came up with this idea that we thought was really, really great, and we presented at the midterm. We're not the soccer ball yet, but we ended up failing. And since we're all students here, we can appreciate that this is not a good thing. So if you're wondering where innovation comes from, it's from the attempt not to fail out of school. So my team, we went into a room. We thought critically about our own experiences. So not relying on expertise necessarily, because I'm not an engineer, but thinking about life as we have lived it in these different contexts. So the 4 of us that were on this team, we all had experience in developing areas. So we thought about some of the things that I showed you earlier in terms of what are these environments like, what are the things that are present, and what are the things that are lacking, or what are the issues to be resolved. So we made kind of 2 columns, one of presence and one of absence. And so on the present side, we had things like, Coca-Cola. Coke is everywhere. They have some of the strongest supply chains, so that could be something to leverage. And on the lack side, or the absence side, we had things like, plumbing, which of course is present, but there are some areas where it's not. I should give myself a footnote here that there are so many places in the world where there is very strong infrastructure. It may be in an urban area, but then as you move further out, it's not as robust. So places like China have some of the most amazing cities in the world, but as you move further out into the hinterlands, it becomes a different situation. Anyway, so I'll just end that parenthetical addition. So we ended up pairing from these 2 lists the presence of soccer, this almost palpable love for this sport, which people are playing every day, and energy, which was clearly something that's lacking. It's, as we said, inaccessible, unreliable, and unsafe. So these 2 things together made a lot of sense. And since we weren't engineers, it allowed us to think outside the box, because sometimes if you have too much expertise in an area, you're so confined by the perception of limitations that you actually can't break beyond that. So sometimes I think that it's a blessing that I knew nothing, but now I know a little something, which is good. So we came up with this concept for the socket, which is the energy harnessing soccer ball, which is really 3 things in one as far as I'm concerned. First of all, it's the generator, so tapping into this energy component. It's a soccer ball, which I don't think can be underestimated in its own value, because a lot of kids, they're running around, they're playing with, a bundle of plastic bags. I've seen a brick, a shoe. They want to play with anything. And so having some, an honest-to-goodness sphere is a huge advance in and of itself. In fact, a lot of people we talked to originally, when they were skeptical of the technology, said, well, why don't you just distribute soccer balls? One of the reasons is a lot of the terrain where kids are playing, the ball will pop, it'll last a month, and it'll get added to a landfill pretty quickly. So we have these 2 kind of core functional elements. But then we also have this softer side, which is the product being a symbol of empowerment, having personal power, knowing that through your own action you have generated this electricity. and literally deriving a sense of satisfaction and a sense of wonder about how we can creatively solve problems in our own lives, and turning that lens of kind of entrepreneurship to your own home and saying, how do I address these problems using everyday objects and by critically leveraging existing behaviors. So playing soccer, something people are doing anyway. I think it's so important for the business people among us, to ask people to do things that they're already doing. I think that is often the easiest path to get somewhere very productive and often very profitable. So there's a little morsel for you there. So the proof of concept for this ball that we had, again, not engineers, was putting a shake-to-charge flashlight inside a hamster ball, because that was the first thing that our team thought, opening an readily openable, closable ball. So of course, first place you go to get off-the-shelf parts for your minimum viable product, the pet store. Keep that in mind. So we rolled around the ball, hoped it would be enough kind of movement to generate the charge that we wanted. Opened it up, took out the light, which, when you shake it up, that's what generates the charge. Turned it on, and it illuminated. So there was our proof of concept that this was something that could actually work. Unfortunately, when we took this to our peers in the engineering department, again, sometimes engineers can be very heads down. I like to say there are two types of engineers: heads down, heads up. Heads down is very focused on the technical and making sure that you can get the best out of the kind of formulas and knowledge that you have, but sort of in a vacuum. Heads up means you're looking out and seeing how you can apply some of this really wonderful technology that you have, because there's so many innovations that we don't even know about because the heads down aren't looking at how to apply it. So we weren't running into any heads up engineers. We were running into a lot of heads down engineers. And they were saying, I don't care about your hamster ball, which was deeply offensive, obviously. And they said, the amount of energy that you generate here will never be enough. But enough is, I think, it can be a very nebulous concept because it's so related to context. And again, I'm going back to this idea of context that we established earlier here. The context that these engineers were working with was their heads down environment, was, I need to find something that will generate enough power to, move an aircraft carrier around. But that's not the enough that my team was talking about. We were looking at, an hour of light, something between nothing and something. Anywhere in that space was enough. And I think that kind of level of miscommunication from us to the engineers was something that kind of prevented them from understanding what exactly we were going for. So aside from the fact that the engineers were in our kind of peer group were very skeptical, we kind of said, we don't care what you think. We know that you have 5 degrees and have spent 20 years doing your engineering thing, but we looked on Wikipedia. And so we know what we're doing, which is a technique I still use to this day. So we started working with kind of a couple different contracting firms who believed in what we were doing and were aligned with the kind of vision we had set out of creating a ball, leveraging existing behavior, creating energy, and opening up these opportunities for empowerment in resource-poor areas of the world. And so they got on board with us, and here I just wanted to show a little bit of the evolution of the product and some of what went into that. So you can see we went from some pretty crazy ideas, again, outside the box, because where are the limits of the box? We don't know. And then putting it into a more tangible form using off-the-shelf parts, scaling up to using kind of more mass-produced, technologically advanced things. So not just a shake-to-charge flashlight, actually building our own PCB electric boards and things like that. So one of the key elements of moving this arc forward was testing. And so as you go forward in any, any line of business, any product, testing for demand and testing for the usability of your prototype is so important. So we went to our user first. So our first round of tests were actually in South Africa. And so you can see the kids here, and these are pretty crude prototypes, literally just normal soccer balls, carved them open. There's a bladder inside a soccer ball. I know more about soccer ball construction than any one person ever needs to know. Fun fact, all 90% of soccer balls in the world are produced in one town in Pakistan. So for the sake of soccer teams everywhere, we should maintain healthy relations with Pakistan. So we did our prototype testing, and these kids, regardless of how ugly this ball was, were so willing to play with it. A, because of the alternative. So we're substituting a ball that's actually an improvement that lasts longer, and in many cases is much better than what they already have. And B, even after they run away, they don't know that there's any sort of energy component to it. They just like the ball, and you chase them down, and you say, wait, but there's something special. You finally track them down, because kids are so damn fast. And you get to them, and you show them, wait, so now, you've played with it. You plug in the light, and you show them, this is the power that you generated, and there's just this moment of, awe. And you can sort of see the wheels turning and saying, oh, wow, that this is how this has worked. And immediately there's a slew of questions, is this what's inside? Is this how it works? This is pretty cool, but I think this is how you can do it better. Kids are almost always the best critics to validate your prototypes, because they're much more honest, and they often ask much better questions. For adults, they'll say, but how will you distribute it? Is this a profitable venture? But kids will say, what's this product? How does it work? What's inside it? What are you doing? And we'll ask you sort of the more critical and often sometimes more relevant questions. So this is another picture of some of those tests. This is in Mexico, again, with a kind of more updated version of the ball, constantly taking the feedback from our users, not only the kids, but also the parents, when we would kind of drop balls off at their homes, ask them how they'd use it, things like that. So really experiencing the full life cycle of the ball in these communities. And that's me and one of our product engineers in Mexico, again, kind of showing kids how these things are working. And again, so one of our first mass-produced model had this gyroscopic mechanism inside, and this was really great because it was a design that could be manufactured at scale. But then as we went and tested it, we got a lot of helpful feedback from these sessions about the feeling of the ball, the usability in the home, things like that. So taking that feedback and really digesting it to get to this next version, which was a bit lighter, a bit more energy efficient, and something that the users enjoyed a lot more. And this is in Brazil. Order of my photos here. Let me see. Bloop, bloop. Yeah, so we went to Brazil, and this girl was actually the best player of any that I have ever seen. I feel like they should hire her up and bring her to AC Milan or something. She was amazing. Anyway, so the ball specs that we currently have, and ones that are our sort of targets, so if any other factors change, it's fine, but these are ones that we really want to stick with in terms of our threshold for what's an acceptable product. One is that it shouldn't have to be inflated, and then it should not be able to be deflated. And the reason for that is when you're delivering the balls and you're distributing them, who has a pump? Not a lot of people. And also, if it gets punctured, we don't want that to be the end of this product. We want it to have a longer lifespan. Again, we don't want it to end up in the landfill. And also in terms of the kind of eco life cycle of the product in its lifetime, we don't want it to do more harm than good in terms of the kind of inputs in the footprint sense. 30 minutes of play is 3 hours of light. That's what we're working on now in terms of the energy efficiency, and hopefully that will only go up. We want it to be playable, so in its 3 functions that we talked about, one was the energy, the second was the actual ball itself, and we don't want that to fall by the wayside in favor of energy efficiency. We really want it to be a functioning ball as well. And finally, the refurbishment. We want people to be able to change out the parts when they're any technology fails after a certain time. The number of cell phones I've destroyed is a testament to that. So when we go to the communities, we want to be able to train people to actually replace the parts. Accessories we want to be using: lamp, number 1, water purifier, also helpful, phone charger, speakers, even a mini fridge, hot plate is something we're also talking about now. Basically trying to address critical needs in a lot of the communities where we are, and that varies by community. So lamp is almost universal to a lot of the places that we're delivering around the world, which I can talk about a bit later. Water purifier, also a big issue. Phone charger, huge issue. The penetration rate of cell phones is obscenely high. And also, whenever I go anywhere, I'll have my little dinky whatever travel phone, and kids will walk up to me and say, you have an ugly phone, look at my really nice phone. And I'm like, you don't have shoes. And so anyway, but that's part of the priorities here. So really getting to know your customer is an important thing. So audio speakers that we actually designed after feedback from our tests in Brazil. The communities in the favelas in Rio they just listened to music all the time, and we said, what about cell phone charger, lamp? They're like, yeah, that's all good, but what we really want is great speakers so that we can dance more. So we worked on that. So again, an example of listening to the customer. Here's this girl, love it. So the fun and the functions. I've talked a bit about the energy component and the ball component, but I want to dig into this empowerment issue a bit more. So there's the function in the home, and the applications as an educational tool is really where this empowerment comes through, and using soccer with a lot of the organizations that we work with as a platform for kind of pedagogical experiments. So not only the more concrete stuff in terms of thinking about energy and where it comes from, and kind of the resources and the health and the science and everything like that, but the softer lessons are what I'm actually more excited about: the innovation and creativity and thinking about how to kind of change aspects of your life using this problem-solving lens, especially since so many schools in the US as well are focusing on rote memorization and kind of passing tests to get to the next level of your education, often at the expense of this maker and inventor mentality that I think is so critical, especially as we're thinking about the future 10 years hence. How are we going to be more creative? So this is one of our education pilots in South Africa, where we're using an exercise saying, draw what you think is inside the ball. And a lot of times it really has nothing to do with what's the reality or what the kids know might be in it. It's just artistic, or it's expressive, or sometimes it's something that looks a lot cooler than what's actually inside of the ball. So we take those and we file them away. But what we really learned is amplifying the play in everybody's lives is something that really resonates. And that's why I think we've had a lot of really positive reception, not only in the communities where we work, but also in the US and in the kind of media sense, because everybody wants to play more. There's this gamification kick, making everything in your life sort of funner to experience. So that is the platform of the fun and the functionality that Uncharted Play as a company more broadly wants to embrace. And so this is just kind of the end of the socket component. But what's up next for us is this new product called the Ludo, which we're doing pilots on now. It's a product more designed for lack of better words, the developed world, so a wealthier client. with the objective not of energy, but of physical play. So instead of, these massively multiplayer online games that we don't want to play, or in many cases people play too much. So it's a ball that has a wireless tracker in it that actually keeps track of how much you play with it. So it's sort of kind of like the Nike Fuel type thing, but except for your soccer ball. And it will upload those play hours to an online platform where you can then use your play hours as currency to give to different nonprofit causes that are focusing on various areas of development: sanitation, energy, of course, education, health. So actually, playing more means you can do more good and actually get outside and have the opportunity to give not only financially, but to give through activity and through this emotional connection. So again, the fun and the function is what we're trying to establish here. So I couldn't come to a college without using my Dos Equis man slide. So I think one of the big takeaways is constantly searching, if you're not the expert, if you don't have the expertise, to really internalize the experiences that you have had and use that as a base for expanding your knowledge and learning more, not only about a given area of business or an area of innovation, but also more about your consumer and how they're going to use the product and what they like about it, and using that as a pivoting point. So there's a lot to be said for gut instincts and persevering, but I think measuring the demand and having a very exacting view of what the future prospects of your business is so critical. So thank you very much. I can ramble on at length, but I have a feeling that any questions you have are much more interesting than whatever I can improvise. So I will leave it at that. Thank you. Great. I'll just go back. Just a second. Go. No. There we are. Hopefully that's helpful. All right. Any questions?
Hello. How much does it cost to produce one, and how do you decide where you're going to sell it or distribute it?
Okay. I'll handle the second part of the question first. So I think everybody heard, but in terms of where to distribute and the cost of doing that, I have the privilege now of pitching this pretty high because you're all kind of business-oriented people. So economies of scale are a big issue for us, right? So when we're starting, we have a very small volume of what we're doing, and that means it's very expensive to produce. And as we grow and produce more, it's going to become cheaper per unit. So right now, the price sort of has no bearing on what the future price will be. But suffice it to say, one of the problems is that our target user in the developing world for the socket can't afford what we're distributing. And that has implications for our business model. So the technology and the operations management actually shapes our strategy. So instead of selling directly to a lot of these places in ways that we could, there are a lot of kind of energy shops where people can buy flashlights and solar lanterns and things like that. What we've decided to do is have a two-pronged revenue model. So the first part of that is partnering with institutions and corporate partners who can afford these balls. And what we do is have them subsidize the cost of distributing to the various areas where we've been. I think we're now on 5 continents and 15 some countries. So Mexico, El Salvador, Costa Rica, Honduras, Nicaragua, Brazil, Haiti, Spain, Nigeria, South Africa, there was somewhere else. Anyway, So I'm sort of losing track, but isn't that great? There are so many places. Yeah, so as we work with our corporate partners, then they help us distribute. And I know this is a very roundabout way of answering your question, but it's also interconnected that it's hard. It's hard to answer in a pointed way. So in terms of the manufacturing, a lot of that was kind of learning on the fly. And the gut instinct, if you're thinking manufacturing, there's kind of one place you think of, right? China. Of course you go to China. And so we found suppliers in China that were willing to kind of work with us and understood, and it was important to us to use kind of reputable suppliers because we're making a product for kids, so we don't want kids actually making them. That worked for a while, but then we had a lot of production issues, and we had shipping issues, and we had quality issues, and we had, intellectual property leakage issues. And what we came to discover was that manufacturing in China is a lot harder than one would think, because you really need someone there full-time overseeing the production of your product, especially if it's something more technological. So we've actually brought the assembly component back to the US, which is great for a lot of reasons. We get tax credits, we get super close oversight because our offices are in New York City and the assembly is in Long Island. We work with a great company called PAT to do that. Just name dropping. I'm going to post this and then they'll see that I refer to them. Which is important, maintaining those really close relationships with your partners. And so we have kind of the most critical, sensitive parts of what we're doing now in the US. I'm going to preempt another question related to manufacture, which is, would you ever do it in the countries where you're distributing? And the answer is absolutely. But again, there's this scale issue. When will we be at a point where we can do that effectively? And the answer is not right now. We really want to perfect what we have before we scale, because you don't want to scale up a product that still has, issues to be resolved. And to the extent that, there will always be issues and there will never be a final iteration because you're constantly improving, that's true of any product. We feel like we're not quite in the place where we want to be to tackle the second branch of the revenue model that I referred to, which is retail. We want to take this product and make it available to anyone, even if it's on a want basis rather than a need basis. But what we found in doing testing among and pilots in the US is that the product is not at a point where the US consumer is satisfied. And so we want to take it to that point where the US consumer will be satisfied. And I think a great step in that direction is bringing production under closer supervision. So that is a super long answer to your question. Other questions? Yes.
Yes, I have a question regarding the impact. Obviously, the impact of 3 hours of play for 30 minutes is pretty compelling. However, it takes at least 5 to 10 kids to play soccer, and that means whose ball is played. So I'd like to understand what your experience has been in the actual application and who gets what and how they generate so much power, and maybe if they're using the ball in different ways to move it around to generate the energy.
Yes, great. I'm so glad you asked this question. I love it when people ask this question because it's something that we spent a long time trying to resolve. And just to reiterate, so there are a lot of kids that play soccer, but there's only one ball. So what do you do with that? And again, these big questions have strong bearing on implementation. So for several reasons, and mutually reinforcing reasons, we don't distribute just randomly or haphazardly in communities. We don't touch down, go around, and just pass things out. We actually work very closely with a best practice network of partners. So we partner with NGOs or community institutions on the ground in the areas where we work, so that they can help us in a contextually relevant way distribute and implement this educational programming that I was referring to earlier, that is more connected to the issues of this particular community. The corollary to that is when we have the kind of infrastructure there with the organization that we work with, they can help us figure out the best way to kind of distribute the power. And so we have a couple different models that we've been testing out. One is kind of on a library model. So you have several balls that kids are using, and then they can take turns kind of checking them out on a rotation basis so that everybody gets to benefit from the power that's generated. And then that way, even if there are 10 kids per ball in a given program, there will be some sort of equitable rotation. And there are various issues that stem from that. Another model we've been exploring is kind of a group share model. So there are kids that share a given ball, like they're on a team, and they can build responsibility by kind of sharing the ball among themselves in a way that makes sense to them. And that's been really successful, particularly among kids who are sort of in 5th to 8th grade. The parents of the kids really appreciate it because it teaches them more about responsibility and things like that. And then the final model is actually a one-to-one. So one kid to one ball, so that each kid actually has their own. And this, you would think, would be sort of the most logical, but this has been the least successful. Because if we do exercises and drills with the soccer balls and then passing them and playing with the games, but you're not getting as much out of the social component of the ball that you could be. You're not deriving these same kind of responsibility and learning benefits. Yeah, you get light more often, but we feel like the softer side of what we can deliver through this product is not really being captured. So in short, there are a lot of different channels that we're using to kind of pilot answers to this solution of how to divide up the power, and we're kind of collecting and evaluating and monitoring data around that now. Other questions? Yeah, no, go for it.
Is the ultimate goal to eventually make a profit or to just break even, have a not-for-profit?
Great question. So this is something that I wasn't sure would fit in or come up, but again, business students, so there's an opportunity here. So we're formed as an S Corp, which is a for-profit structure, and there are a lot of reasons why we did that. So many people actually think we're a not-for-profit, but we aren't. And the reason is not because we are mission-driven, it's because of liability issues and opportunity issues. So in terms of liability, everyone knows what an LLC is, right? Limited Liability Corporation. What's interesting about that is your liability is limited. If you're a corporation, that corporation is treated, tried, and sued as a person. And so the individual has limited liability. For a not-for-profit, people that are board members, people that work for it, if it's a product-related company, can actually be personally liable for anything that might happen to a user. So obviously, I'm really passionate about this product, but if someone goes in for the header and, gets a concussion or something, which happens in any sport, not necessarily because of the product that they're using, I could be personally liable for that, which is no good. And then on the opportunity issue, unfortunately, not-for-profits have a really bad reputation. And it means that a lot of corporations don't want to work with you. And since a key component of our revenue model is working kind of fairly intensely with corporations and institutions, you have to be a business to work with business in some cases, which is unfortunate, but is true. And so you have this legitimacy that's conferred upon you by being a for-profit structure. What I think is exciting, though, is there's a growing number of states that are adopting B Corp structures, which is a benefit corporation, which is a hybrid of this not-for-profit mission-driven component, as well as the kind of bottom line focus as well. And what's interesting about B Corp is you can actually put into the bylaws of your business that the board cannot remove any officer, cannot restructure because of focusing on a social impact goal rather than a profit goal. So if I choose to make something out of recycled paper instead of normal paper because the recycled paper has minimizes impact, my board can't kick me out of the company for breach of fiduciary duties, which is an interesting and positive thing, I think. So B Corp. Good area to follow up on if you're more interested in that. And then through the S Corp, we get these added opportunities. We get to work more closely with our partners. It opens the doors for us in a lot of areas. The only thing that's a little bit more tricky is working with our not-for-profit partners, which is actually why we've set up a separate branch, which is the Uncharted Play Foundation. And that helps us work and derive sort of the benefits that we need to in terms of taxes and kind of partnering with organizations that can only partner with NGOs, of which there are quite a few, so that we can import more effectively and not have duties on a donated item. We spend a lot of time fighting with, I know the word in French, but I don't know, I'm forgetting the word in English. It'll come to me. We spend a lot of time fighting with freight people. So that is sort of the reasoning behind our structure. And as a social enterprise, I think the for-profit doesn't mean you're evil. I don't think that for-profit means that you're sacrificing quality. I think that for-profit means that you want to attract the best talent. You want to have a sustainable model, and you don't want any excuse to be funded, purely by an unstable, revenue stream. You really want to be able to rely and scale what you're doing. And I think the for-profit structure facilitates that much better than the alternatives.
Julia, I'm curious about your new product. Was that the Ludo?
Yes.
Is that correct? Is that product dependent entirely on corporate generosity, CSR programs within large organizations? If not, how do you get people to fund the things you give away in the third world?
Yeah. So just to reiterate again with the Ludo, so we have this ball, tracks how much you play, load your play hours to this platform called the Play Fund, and then you can give your hours of play to various causes. So you're absolutely right. Our corporate partners remain a really central component that's driving this platform. You would think that CSR, corporate social responsibility, would be the main factor behind that, but we're actually working a lot more with marketing departments. We've established a really strong brand for ourselves in terms of innovation and kind of the fun and the functionality of what we do, and a lot of people want to ride the coattails of that. So we're working with State Farm, Western Union, Televisa in Mexico, which is the big basically the equivalent of ABC there. Other organizations, some energy companies. So I think what makes it appealing for us is that we're not competing, we're facilitating. And to that end, on a slightly related note, as you noticed, I'm like the queen of tangents. Yeah. And that's how you know I'm a nerd. But, oh God, my tangent interrupted my tangent. No, it's gone. Anyway, but yeah, so we work with organizations there on the Play Fund platform to help channel some of their set-aside kind of marketing and CSR dollars to expose them to these really innovative projects, because a lot of the projects that we're working with on this Play Fund platform are actually cutting edge. We're not doing kind of the same that everybody else is doing. We're working with our partners to have some like really interesting, creative approaches. Some of them will fail, Some of them will not be, the best, but I think that from that you'll actually be able to cultivate some very strategic and compelling models that we could actually scale more broadly. So, yeah.
I was wondering what competition is like for the socket, because I know that there are other products that come out of China to developing countries that produces electricity through different sources like solar energy. So I was wondering, do you have any main competitors or?
Yes. Thank you so much. That was actually what my tangent was going to be about. So in terms of our competitors, so one major there are two major misconceptions. One is that we're taking funding away from other worthy causes, and the second is that we're inefficient. Okay, so taking money away from other people. This is absolutely false, I can say beyond a shadow of a doubt, because we're not working with, the World Bank, my former employer. We're not working with, a lot of these NGOs to take money away from them. We're actually working with players that would not normally invest in this vertical. Okay, so we have people, State Farm, one of our best clients, and we've worked with them now on 3 occasions. They're really absolutely, a pleasure to work with. That said, they're not an energy company. They have no interest in, scaling or producing other types of energy. What we're doing is we're actually attracting, based on our brand, a lot of these dollars that would normally be funneled into, marketing. And so we're bringing them to the sector and actually bringing more attention to these worthy other technologies like the solar lanterns, which are, so effective and are bringing a lot of these kind of the power functionality to off-grid homes. So in that vein, that we have this inefficiency misconception. People say, why is your next product going to be, hand crank? No, because that is not what we do. That is not our value proposition. Our value proposition is fun and function, and offering those two things combined. So while a hand crank might only take, 15 minutes of sitting in the corner, really sadly crying into my lap and cranking it for 3 hours of light, the socket leverages the existing behavior of play and playing, with a ball, which people are doing, kids are doing for hours a day anyway. And it's fun. There's nothing fun about a hand crank. So that's this different value that we're adding. So while, as I said, the solar lanterns and things like that have, a place, and they're very valuable, and this is a huge market. If any of you are looking into, opportunities in developing areas, catering to the energy needs at the bottom of the pyramid, this is a really interesting place to be right now. Or anything at the bottom of the pyramid is a pretty cool place to play, no pun intended. And so combating these two misconceptions of, detracting and the inefficiency is something that we spend, a fair amount of time on. But, our partners are bringing dollars to this space, and we're bringing a new perspective on energy that actually, in addition to dollars, attracts attention. Because, energy is not normally something we think of as fun. It's a lot of times it's forgotten. In the Millennium Development Goals, you have, hunger, you have water, you have a lot of these other issues, but there's nothing particularly sexy about providing light. We talk about energy a lot in terms of oil and, nuclear power and things like that in the US, but how many times have you seen something, a major news item about providing energy overseas or, in developing areas? I mean, we see things about, the World Food Program all the time, but, the IEAE doesn't get as much exposure. Oh.
What's the purchase price of a socket and the purchase price of a Ludo?
So for the Ludo, we're still determining that. If you have any suggestions about what your willingness to pay would be, that would be really helpful. A lot of it has to do with us finalizing our production costs, because obviously that has a lot to do with how we price. But I guess there are two ways you could price something. One is based on covering your costs, and the other is based on the value you're contributing. And we'd like to skew toward value rather than just costs, but obviously we need to know what our costs are just so we have it in our back pocket. So we're going to and doing a lot of, pilots. We don't like surveys because what people say and what people do are two very different things. So we actually do a lot of, pilots and see the life cycle of the ball to see how people are using it. Now, for the socket, since we have these two different revenue streams, for our corporate partners, it depends on the volume of balls that they're supporting, and also sort of what their budget is. We work really closely with them to make sure that we can get as much out of this, mutually beneficial partnership as possible. So a lot of times they're less focused on the, getting to various different areas, but what they would really like is some strong educational programming and media collateral. So they want to be able to film what's going on, and obviously that's a different price structure. So for a lot of our corporate partners, it's not like on a per ball basis, it's sort of on a per assignment basis. And then in terms of the retail channel, that's something we're also still exploring. We want to keep it, it depends kind of who you're selling to, right? If it's a high-end design product, that's something very different than distributing to educators, which is a segment that's been really interested in what we do. So we're actually targeting educators first in this kind of intermediary step from kind of wholesale to retail. We're working with teachers and professors to implement these creative curricula. So there, it will be probably less than $100, I would think, which, for those of you that are soccer buffs, is much less than a really nice, normal soccer ball. So sometimes I think we undervalue what we deliver, but that's a debate for me to have with my marketing team, not with you.
How'd you end up doing in that class that you designed the ball?
Yeah. How we did in the class, like the grade. I got the worst grade I have ever gotten in any class I've ever taken ever. So your professors might hate me for saying this, but grades don't matter because they don't really drive what you're passionate about. Although sometimes it's connected. I think I got maybe a C or low C's, something like that. Something that would make my mother cry. So don't tell her, please.
Hi, so I understand that you distribute a lot of your product overseas, but most of the manufacturers in the United States. Mm-hmm. I wonder if your company has like a customer support group. Mm-hmm. Whenever there is a problem with the product, who do they report it to? Do they send the product back to the United States or? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so right now, since our kind of order volume is almost 20,000. Our delivery is much more tightly controlled, so we're really working to make sure that we perfect this. So we don't want to just be doing everything at once. We're actually taking it slow to make sure that we have this customer relationship that we want, that we have the freight relationship that we want, because there's nothing worse than scaling a bad model. So right now, in terms of the amount that we've actually delivered and kind of left in communities, that's something more like 2,000 or 3,000. So we have a lot of catching up to do, but that will be much faster when we have a best practice. So right now, our framework for dealing with potential issues that arise with either the product or partner issues, we haven't had any so far because we really work hard to vet our partners and make sure that it's a really strong relationship and long-term. We basically just have them call our team directly. We have a full-time staff of about 10 and an angry horde of interns. They're not angry, they're very happy. A playful horde of interns, about 15 of them. And so they are very involved with keeping keeping in touch with our partners. And the language thing is actually something we're really focusing on. So we have, I think 4 Spanish speakers, and as I was reciting that list of places that we're working, there are a lot of places that are Spanish speaking, and so they're managing those relationships. We really don't want to go through intermediaries, but that might be something that we'll have to look at as we scale further in the distribution model, because how can you have a really strong, intimate relationship with 100 different organizations? And there are different ways to cope with that in terms of partnering with a branch-oriented organization, although sometimes those are more difficult to deal with. At any rate, the model right now is actually having a very direct relationship, and if there haven't been any product failures, because we've done such extensive piloting to make sure that there's neither technical nor kind of social issues that arise. But I think what would happen is we'd probably actually send someone out to, and I think that's what we've kind of budgeted and planned for, send somebody out to the site rather than shipping it back, because for anybody that's ever kind of shipped overseas or something like that, or if you've moving trucks, it's like shipping light. Shipping is such a pain. It's and logistics in general is a weird industry. Logistics of shipping people around airlines, definitely not a profitable industry. So sorry about this monologue. I had sort of a miserable airline experience yesterday, so I'm still bitter. All right.
Quick question. In as much as soccer is like the #1 sport, does the technology translate to other sports in other countries and other regions? So, for example, in the South Pacific, you have rugby, and like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, you have cricket there. Would that work in those countries?
Yeah. So, and even other sports from the U.S. One of our a couple people that we've been talking to that were sponsors of the Super Bowl. We were saying, we can get you a football sample for the Super Bowl. Guess what happened on the day of the Super Bowl? Massive blackout. Wish you had a socket now, didn't you? Anyway, so they were on the phone pretty quickly about that. And I think that that was a missed opportunity for them, obviously. Yeah, so we're definitely thinking about other sports. Ones like rugby, American football, those ones are really great candidates because they actually, the mechanism for what we have inside the socket would fit really well into those other balls. Actually, in the prototypes that we've done for an American football, you throw a perfect spiral every time. It's like the vortex. If anyone had one in the 90s, I would worship John Elway, so I was like, vortex, I have 7. Anyway, but yeah, and I'm not a very talented, thrower, so that could be a whole kind of thing in and of itself. But I think the constraint here is both size and how the kind of ball or unit is played with. So hockey puck, cricket ball. When I was in India for partnership stuff, everyone said, oh, cricket, which is interesting because a lot of people I was talking to were of, fairly elevated social classes, so they were much more passionate about cricket. But the further down the totem pole you get, people were more passionate about soccer, actually, which was interesting. So we're not going to do a golf ball. Basketball is actually an interesting one because the mechanism of how you actually play with the ball is so much different. So kicking. The bounce factor is obviously important, but it's not critical to the way the game is played. With basketball, every bounce needs to go where you want the ball to go, right? So that'll be a little bit different in terms of the engineering for that. So I think the quickest win for us is actually in the rugby and American football space because we have to make pretty few technological modifications. Yeah.
I apologize for this question. I'm an accountant. Mm-hmm. I was wondering, do you have a target cost per kilowatt hour for these products?
Nope.
Okay. So, any idea of how efficient these products are in generating power?
Yeah. So I think We don't kind of generally frame things in terms of lumens and things like that. I spoke a year ago or so at an energy conference, and I was kicking myself that I didn't bring like a cheat sheet, because they were all like, no, 30 minutes to 3 hours of power, that doesn't tell me anything. What are you powering? Whereas, the normal populace is like, oh, that sounds pretty good. So you caught me. So the 30 minutes of play to 3 hours of power is with regard to high efficiency LED bulb, which is what we use in our lamp. So 3 hours of clean, consistent lamp light. And actually, the lamp stays working after 3 hours. It's just not the brightest setting. So if we did it in terms of how long the lamp stays on, it would be 7 hours or something like that. But we wanted to do a conservative estimate. We had a fan, and that worked for I think about as long as the lamp did. But in terms of kind of trying to assign cost to the kilowatt hour, I think it's actually an important lesson in metrics and which metrics you choose to evaluate your performance by. And for us, that's just not one that we find incredibly critical. And I think metrics and kind of incentives within your team need to align. So the metrics that we look at are more like, cost per unit, and trying to get that down, or lifetime of the unit, because whatever we choose to measure is what is managed. So if we're measuring those things, we're incentivizing our engineering team to focus on that, because that's what we're measuring. It's sort of an interesting psychological thing. So if we're asking them to focus on cost, they're going to bring down costs. If we ask them to focus on, the durability, they're going to focus on durability. So we choose very carefully which metrics that we're actually enforcing.
With the Ludo being marketed, I guess, to more like upper middle class to middle class people, assuming it's going to be about $100, how are you going to prove the functionality to the average user in America, I guess? Because you've got people who are watching a Nike ball every weekend for the Premier League or an Adidas ball in Africa. How do you prove that your ball's as functional and it's beneficial to helping other people?
Okay, great. So for the Ludo, the model is we will kind of sell it to people here. And it's sort of riding this gamification trend of trying to track how much you play with it. And the giving component is through the Play Fund platform. So when you upload your hours, you can donate your hours like currency to these different causes. So we're speaking to a different segment, I guess, than the normal athlete kind of sports consumer. So the technical segment name, and they have the journal named after, is LOHAS, which is Lifestyles of Health and Sustainability. So this is as an ethical consumer, we expect that the mother is going to buy this for her kids, and then they're going to play with it. It's not necessarily the group of guys after class on a Friday when it's snowing outside and go play, for instance, outside. They're not going to use a Ludo, probably. It's more of a personal tracking device than a team-oriented thing. So I think the value is in kind of the more you play, the more you give. Being more play, more physical play, getting outside, and the giving component as the value added as well. So broader thing, fun and function. Yeah. I hope I answered your question, but I have a sense that I didn't. So I'm sorry.
Just a small. Would you think about raising the price to like $150, which is seen like as a target range for like a high-class soccer ball, to be able to move into a Tom sort of business model where if you buy a Ludo, you have your own ball, and then you give a socket away?
Yeah, that's something that we've thought about in terms of buy one, give one. And it's actually a model that we explored really intensively with the socket as well, just on the retail side, buy one, give one. And it has a lot to do with marginal cost, actually. So the marginal cost of the socket is pretty high compared to Tom's. So Tom's, they're charging, what is it now, like $60 a shoe? To make those shoes, it costs maybe 50 cents. So when you pay $60, And they give away you get one pair of shoes, 50 cents. They give away another pair, 50 cents, so it's $1. So if we do the math, that's $59 that they generally get to keep, just, revenue less COGS. Or the cost of the goods sold. And so for us, it's a lot more difficult because, and these are just imaginary numbers, so say that you have some piece of technology, like a calculator. Marginal cost of making that, maybe $20. You're gonna sell it for $100. You buy one, you give one, so $40. You only really get to keep a $60 cushion, right? It's harder to, I think, effectively implement a buy one, give one model when you have something that costs more to make. So if we can get the price down low enough, I think it's something that we would definitely explore more again. But I think where buy one, give one is most successful is with, the Toms and, Red, where it's like a bag or something, just because, the cost to make it is so much cheaper. But in terms of fundraising or something like that, I don't think it's something that we've eliminated. As long as people realize that the reason it's so expensive is because of this, relationship and what you're getting. And we also learned a lot from kind of piloting in the US, and this is something where we did rely more on surveys, actually, which makes me want to kick myself. But we said, would you be willing to pay this much more if you knew that, one of the balls that you bought would go to a kid in need? And a lot of people said no. A lot of people really just wanted the ball for themselves, which is fine. I don't have a problem with that. That doesn't make them an evil person. Consumption is consumption. And if that's not where the value is for you, if that's not why you're paying the money for a product, then that's fine. That's not your product. And so I think a lot of it is just being very understanding of the motives of your customer and sort of the kind of cost structure of what you're selling.
Questions? One more.
There's one in the middle here.
Hi. That's a nice dress, by the way.
Thank you.
How hard can you kick the ball before it breaks, and what generally results in it not working anymore?
How hard can you kick it before it breaks?
Yeah, or how much pressure can it take before it breaks, and what generally results in it breaking? What have you encountered most?
Yeah. So related to this issue of what's measured is managed. So obviously, breakage is something that we measure. So if something breaks in a certain way, then we manage toward making it not break that way again. Sometimes that results in something else breaking. So it's sort of an iterative process. So for example, with one of our prototypes, the way we put it together is we had kind of a shell, and then it was through electrolysis or something like that. They put the two pieces of the plastic together when we manufactured. And so there was a problem where if you kicked exactly in the right way, the ball would literally split in half. So we're like, okay, I guess we have to shift up the way that we're assembling. So that I think is one issue, one that we've gotten past. Right now, I think that you could probably kick it as hard as you want, and it would survive. That said, we haven't done a longitudinal study because obviously we've kind of come up with the most recent iteration probably in 6 months ago. And so what we do a lot of the time is actually we have a cement mixer in our office, and we'll put a ball in there for a couple days and see what happens. See the parts inside that break, or if there's any damage to the outside. But I would be really interested to see whether if someone who's older or is playing with 20-year-olds, obviously they're going to be playing differently than kids that are younger. So after 2 years, what's the wear and tear on the ball going to be? Something that I'm definitely interested in learning more about, and something that we're definitely measuring as well. Was there another part to your question? I feel like I missed part of it. Okay.
Hi, I was just wondering, the kind of multiple questions, but all related, kind of going back to early stages of working through this when you were with a group. You said that you were in a group of 4, but it looks like it's just you and one other person now. So I was kind of wondering if you could talk about that, as well as, you were referring to your experiences with the heads down engineers. And I was wondering what the breakthrough in kind of coming across people who would get behind helping you actually implement some of the ideas that you had, since you guys didn't have a engineering background.
Yep.
And then finally, did you send the link of President Clinton talking about your project to your former professor that gave you a stamp?
Okay, so I'll answer those in order of brevity, I guess. So the first one is no. I don't think we've sent the link to him. I like to think that he follows us and cries. No, he's a great guy, and I think that it's not his fault that I failed. It's my own, because in addition to the group project, there are a bunch of these little mini assignments that you had to turn in, and I didn't, because I figured they would see how hard I was working on this other thing, to recover from the failing midterm thing, that they would know how, the good grade that I deserved. But apparently, if you don't turn in papers, that is problematic. So the second question was about teammates. So that's just a kind of matter of life, I guess. People are passionate about things. People are, at different stages. So when our team was together, we had 1 sophomore, 2 juniors, and a senior. So the girl that was a senior, when she graduated, she really tried to handle this in addition to a full-time job and try to kind of manage it along, and it just wasn't possible. And so then the 2 juniors, we were in our senior year and trying to kind of get full-time jobs, because it wasn't apparent to us that this could be a commercializable product. It was something that was kind of interesting and people were interested in it, but we didn't have kind of the strong sense that it was something that was scalable, because we've thought about, the product, but obviously there's this whole infrastructure around the product that you need to think about, and we hadn't. And part of that is a function of just, a lack of familiarity about how these things work. How do you get a manufacturer? I still don't really know. It's sort of like, luck. And it's a case-by-case basis. And for us, it was partially through networking and things like that. So what happened with the group of 4 was essentially both my business partner and I took full-time jobs after we graduated from undergrad. I was in DC, and she was working at a startup in New York. And about 6 months in, we had a conversation and said, let's turn back to this product, because we actually, I think the precipitating event was an email to our kind of team account that said, what happened to you guys? And we were like, what did happen to us? Like, we had this great idea, and we owe it to ourselves, and we owe it to this concept to try to execute. And obviously, idea and execution are 2 very different things. And so we went back, we had a conversation with the group of 4 of us and said, who's stupid enough to quit their job and do this full time? And my partner and I were like, and the other 2 were like, good luck. Have a good time. I think obviously they've I think questioned that decision at times, and that whether they missed the bus. And I think the would have, should have, could have game is a dangerous one. But I think that you have to commit to see whether something will happen. And it was clear that by doing something part-time or on the side, nothing was going to happen. And as far as risk goes, it was a pretty riskless situation. I don't have kids. I have, loans and stuff that I have out already, so what's another, couple thousand to pay back? I have some savings. The worst case scenario is that I live in my parents' basement for a while I find another job. Which would be really sad in a lot of ways, but not devastating. I don't have to feed anyone but myself, and I don't eat that much, so so that was fine. There was a third question. heads down engineers. I think part of the heads down to heads up process is learning to effectively communicate what you're trying to do. I think we were liberal arts idiots, so we didn't really think, why would someone not understand what we're trying to do? Because obviously it was related to the question that was asked earlier. There are more effective ways of doing this. Why aren't you doing that? Why should we work with you because you're not doing the most efficient thing possible? And so learning how to pitch toward this particular audience by saying, look, we're not trying to build the best light, we're trying to build the most playable ball that generates energy, and kind of framing it that way. And so each conversation we had with a different engineer was learning how to refine the pitch. And so obviously the first time we were like, we want to give this ball, but it's also like a generator, and they said there's a generator in the ball, and we distribute it, and kids will use it, and it will be really great, and there will be light. and that's why engineers kind of were like, no, that's, there won't be light, there won't be light. And so kind of getting people to dream with you is a lot about communication and kind of doing that effectively. And I think part of it was also just the engineers that we found to work with at a product development firm. They got what we were trying to do, so even beyond communicating it effectively, they understood. They were like, oh yeah, okay, we get it. So while I would like to take more credit for kind of refining this pitch in an effective way, I think part of it was just finding the right people as well. So that's that.
Julia, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Faculty and students of the
Thank you very much.